Hello. Oh, hello, and welcome back to the tech hiring stage brought to you by HackerJob. Next stop on our whistle-stop tour of tech hiring, we have Summer Curtis, who is joining us to talk all about resilience, and it's important in your hiring process. So without further ado, please, big round of applause for Summer Curtis.
Hi, how is everybody doing? Are we surviving the heat? I think we've got a very intimate group today. I think the heat has chased a lot of people out of these tents. I know I was in a tent earlier and it was quite warm, but welcome and thank you for joining today's session. I can see the screen. So today is all about talking you through my journey of navigating two very different organizations around hypergrowth from TikTok into a much more structured environment within my current organization, which is Hiscox. So I'll tell you, there are two different worlds that are very polar difference apart. Do you need me to talk louder? There you go. Thank you very much for that prompt. So there are two very different worlds. You've got TikTok, which everybody knows, and it's a very popular social media platform, and I'm currently working at Hiscox. For those that aren't aware of Hiscox, it's a specialist insurer, very steeped in legacy, very traditional within the financial services. So they're very two different organizations. At TikTok, it was all about building from scratch and building something at momentum and building something in hypercare and at pace. At Hiscox, it was going into building something from a legacy that was a little bit outdated and with much more structure and much more governance. Two radically different environments, one that was built for speed, agility, and to be able to move at pace, and the other one that was built for long-term strategy. So we'll kick off with my journey at TikTok, which I like to call the tech tornado. When I joined TikTok, we were in a very big period of hypergrowth. I joined in about 2021, and back then, most people thought TikTok was nothing but kids dancing and doing dance routines on there. So it was a really big hypergrowth period. I was brought on board to head up the tech engineering TA function and really build from scratch. There were only about 20 tech engineers that were been hired at that point. So we were really building something from scratch and really having to build at pace. There was a lot of demand in terms of us having to build engineering teams, and we managed to do that across multiple different markets. So we were really sort of going in and managing multiple stakeholders and having to have insane amounts of growth and a lot of demand from our China colleagues, which is where we got our headcount from. And in terms of being able to sort of grow from scratch, we were actually sort of looking at growing a number of different BUs. So we had 19 different teams that we were supporting across the landscape, and we're building those from scratch. There were everything from AI to sales. One of the teams that we were supporting was what we would call the recommendation team, which is a machine learning team, and that's the team that builds the secret sauce that makes TikTok so addictive. So we were actually doing some really cool and innovative stuff. What made it very complex is that we did not have a centralized CTO. So there wasn't anybody from a regional perspective that was actually driving a centralized strategy, that was driving how we were building out these teams. So there were some really big growing pains in terms of how we navigate that, how do we navigate that change, and how do we build a really good strategy and put that in place from a TA perspective. So how do we navigate that chaos of trying to build that pace, no direction, trying to drive, without a real big strategy? So the theme of my session today is really going to be about the planning and the approach to planning and the different variations of how you do it in an agile environment versus a more structured environment. So when looking at TikTok, it was really kind of looking at the micro planning. You had to sort of move at speed. TikTok was a very agile organization. Things changed literally overnight. Strategy one morning was completely different to the strategy the next day. So you had to really think about how you plan for precision and how you micro plan. And that micro plan meant you had to go in and sort of build relationships with CTOs, build relationships across the wider landscape, and make sure that you're tailoring those plans to those individual businesses, but also give yourself the space that you can pivot, you can change, and you can be agile as you're supporting those business units. We put in a weekly forecasting rhythm, and that's not necessarily forecasting about the number of hires that you're going to be making. That's really thinking about the activities that are going to lead you into hires. So what does that mean? So we actually built, one of the things that we did is we built a model that sort of gave us an indication around how many interviews do you have to get to a offer? How many CVs do you have to get to the interview? That kind of helps you sort of look at that pipeline so that you can, if you need to pivot, you can pivot very quickly. And as with growth, when you're building from scratch, you've got HC that has so you've got roles that have multiple HC, so you're hiring for the same thing all the time. So you've got those repeatable roles that keep coming up. And where we had to pivot, we had to sort of go between each one of those business units. We had to create standardized ways of working that fit that business unit, that fit that CTO, that hiring process, and make sure that we were able to implement it so that we could move at pace. The really key part of that is that we were also competing for some really big talent against the FANG organization. So when we say FANG, that's your Facebook at the time, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. So we were really competing against some really top-tier organizations. But as we were doing all this, we're also building up employer branding at the same time, because that was pretty non-existent as well. And the resilience reminder for this one is really, I've got a couple of statements in there that are talking about being grounded. I think when you're moving at pace, it's really easy to get lost in the chaos and to get lost in the process. As TA, we know how crazy our worlds can get. We know how crazy things can get around, losing track of process, not having the structure in place. And it's really important that you kind of stay grounded, have a clear focus, and make sure that you're able to move and be agile as you're moving through those processes. Having that resilience means that you're just weathering the storm, and it's building structures and systems that are able to be flexible, that can bend, and that they can be, they can drive as their strategy changes. Now we're going to do 180 to Hiscox, and we are going to go into a much more strategic rebuild of our organization and where we are at right now. So when we're looking at Hiscox is, as I said earlier, it's an insurance company that is 124 years old, very structured, very traditional, financial services, very regulated, and does not have that agility that an organization like TikTok does. How many people have had this, worked in TA functions where you've had these scenarios? Show of hands. 1, 2. Yep. So coming into Hiscox, there were a lot of challenges to overcome. So we had a very outdated and reactive TA model. We were very reliant on agencies. We had a lot of technology and process gaps. Data was really difficult for us to come by. And we had a team structure that didn't really work for the volume of recruitment that we wanted to be driving. There was a lot of misalignment. And because we had technology gaps, no data, there was a lot of team burnout as well. So people were working really long hours and not getting anywhere pretty quickly. So once we've kind of figured out what our problem statements were within that, we kind of sort of looked at how can we start to think about solutions? And again, we're coming into the planning piece in terms of what I learned throughout the transformation. There's a number of things that you're going into an organization that you have to be thinking about. So, a lot of this is, I didn't necessarily have this at TikTok, but when you're looking at the challenges and roadblocks, planning is going to be key for you to be overcoming some of those things. So where we were starting from at Hiscox is a very low maturity base when we're talking about having, technology, data, process issues, and really trying to sort of organize yourself from there. The next challenge that we faced was, having aggressive and unrealistic timeframes. So we were trying to do a lot very quickly at pace, but we weren't really planning well. So we were not really hitting the goals that we wanted to be hitting. We didn't have a really good roadmap in place. we were asking team members to get more and more involved in transformation, but we were moving at, again, as we were moving at pace and we didn't have the right timelines in place, people were getting transformation fatigue. They were getting burnout. So that meant that we didn't have that right plan in place. We need to the governance processes. As you're going into organizations, each organization is going to have a very different governance process. At Hiscox, it's a very big governance process, and culturally everybody's going to be very different. At Hiscox, at TikTok, I didn't really have that governance process, but at Hiscox, it's a very detailed governance process that we have to follow. So you have to be really mindful of your audience and how do you get things over the line and how you're going to get those approvals. The biggest thing that I struggled with when looking at managing transformation is just balancing the delivery and the BAU alongside the transformation activities. It's a really tight balancing act to be able to do that. And what added to that is also managing some very complex stakeholder relationships and trying to be able to drive that and answer the questions. In our organization, there is it's a very relationship-driven organization. So what does that mean? That means that people want to have a say, they want to have an opinion, they want to be heard. So it's trying to balance that feedback and people really having wanting to be really involved, but also sort of taking a step back and creating some foundations that actually make, that creates standardization, that creates, a really good foundation to build on. Again, we talked about the tech dependencies. And the last thing that I think we sort of, the big learning for me coming out of this was having the right people in the right place. We didn't always have that. We didn't always have the right support. We didn't always have, the leadership and the guidance that we could have put in place. So that's kind of some of the big learning roadblocks. And, taking a lot of that away is why I've kind of learned about planning. So when we're looking at planning and how that sort of empowers TA outcomes, it's looking at, without structure, progress stalls. You don't get very far very fast. So you think you're getting far and you go 2 steps ahead and you take 5 steps back. So it's really about having that structure and putting that structure in place to make sure that you are progressing. You still need to put your guardrails in. So you need that. Without that roadmap, you can very easily veer off and go in a very different direction than what you thought you wanted to go. So you can feel exposed, you don't have the answers to the right questions, and you're not really sure of what good looks like. And work also feels really heavier without that sort of good planning in place. So, everything feels urgent, everything feels like it needs to get done yesterday, and nothing feels stable. So with a plan in place, you kind of know what you're working towards. So it makes the workload that little bit lighter. We're going to fast forward, so I'll give you where we are right now. So we're going to fast forward 12 months onwards. We went through a very complex and long-winded RFP process. That's another story for another time. But we are now working in a hybrid TA model, which we launched about a month ago, where we're partnering with so we explored the RPO market, and we're partnering with what we call a global solutions provider, who we have in the room, Janine from Wilson. But we're not calling it an RPO because we're not outsourcing anything. We're actually bringing in capability that will complement our team. So where we had an outdated and reactive TA model, we've got a new new strategic TA model implementation. Through our partnership, we are implementing an enhanced sourcing and coordination capability, which we did not have in our organization before. So that's where we're not necessarily outsourcing anything. We're actually bringing in enhanced capabilities that will move us away from that reliance on agencies. We're also looking at our systems optimization. So Workday is our system of choice. And so we're looking at making those enhancements and creating better digital enablement. We're building much better reporting tools that go hand in hand with that so that we can look at our metrics and our KPIs. And through that, we've been able to uplift the team so that they're a lot more strategic, moving away from reactive. They've got clarity on their roles. They've got more capacity, and they're able to sort of do the more strategic elements of the role. So when we're looking at that resilience reminder number 2. So strategic planning, it enables repeatable processes, gives you good governance, gives you data-driven frameworks, it drives scale and makes talent acquisition sustainable. And with a plan, there is still going to be chaos, but at least you've got a compass in place that you know what you're working towards. It's not about controlling everything. It's about staying oriented and staying on the course and just knowing what your goal is and what your outputs are going to be. And also what I've learned is TA has a lot of data, and data is definitely TA's superpower. And you can bring that into your strategic conversations, your governance processes, your decision-making processes, and really kind of win people over with that data and being able to drive those conversations at the top table. Some final thoughts for me, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A. Planning definitely turns reactivity into readiness. It gives you that structure that we talked about. It does protect your people and provides guardrails to your teams. It gives you that credibility, and it creates space for better and quicker decisions. So you have quicker decision making, and it lets you bounce, not break. So you're not necessarily breaking yourself in the process. So that is a little sort of insights from me. Hopefully there's some little nuggets of information in there for everybody, and I'm happy to open it up for some Q&A.
Show of hands, any questions at all for Summer?
Summer, knowing what you now know, is there anything that you would have done differently? Not at a personal level, but from a planning perspective?
I would have sat down and really thought about the work. Because I think when you go into a TA environment, everything needs to happen yesterday, right? Everybody wants that hire yesterday. Everything is a priority. Everybody's business is a priority. And I think you have to kind of I would have taken a step back and sort of looked at what is BAU and what is transformation and how do you actually plan for one side or the other and give your time the space to think. And I think what I would have done better is really the scoping piece. So the scoping piece is really about how much time is something actually going to take. It's all well and good to say, I'm going to deliver something by this date because you want to appease somebody or make somebody happy. But it's really about going, hold on a minute, that isn't going to be realistic. Even though you think it's going to be realistic, it probably isn't. So planning, as I've learned through my journey, is really about just taking a step back and having a realistic view on that. Thank you.
Hi, you mentioned Workday. We also have Workday as our ATS for the foreseeable future. What did you implement to really help improve your ways of working?
So what did I implement to? So I did not implement Workday. I inherited it as well. So it was not something that so it wasn't a tool. And it was actually, the recruiter module was implemented before I got there. It was implemented without a lot of TA input. So it was really not in a great place. And it still is not in the best place, by the way. But we've brought in some Workday consultants. So it's really about kind of taking a step back. And as part of our TA process, we've really reimagined what our processes look like end to end, and then what we've done is sort of taken a step back and then gone to the Workday team to see what is feasible, because we can all do the nice slick TA end to end recruitment process, but if the tech is not going to enable it, then you're kind of back at square one, right? So it's really about sort of thinking about how do you then work collaboratively with your Workday tech teams and make sure that they understand the process that you've got. We're not there yet. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. We've kind of done our first phase of our implementation, but yeah. So Workday, I could talk all day about it because it's a pain point for a lot of us, I think. But yeah, I think it's part of our first phase, and we will mature it. We will evolve it. It was really about just sort of talking with that tech team and sort of making sure that they understood what we wanted to get out of the system, and there were compromises on both sides. So we didn't necessarily get what we want right now, but we've got a Workday backlog that we're working through to kind of make some further enhancements.
Hi, so my question is, going from somewhere so agile and...
Could you put your mic...
going from somewhere so agile and I guess tech focused like TikTok to a more, as you said, structured and maybe old school environment like Hiscox, where do you see the biggest opportunity where there is actually scope to apply your learnings and that experience from TikTok, a more agile environment, to an environment which is more structured, but probably it's harder to implement big change? But where do you see that kind of area of possibility?
Good question. I think you can bring the principles of working in an agile environment like in TikTok into a structured environment like Hiscox, because you're driving things at pace, you want to drive decision making. You still have to go through a structured decision process, and that you can't get around that, but you can have quicker thinking, you can come up with designing really quick, you can sort of bring that pace and that creativity as well into the frame, because I think a lot of times when you go into those structures environments, people have been there for a really long time, they don't know what good looks like outside of that environment, and bringing fresh perspective and fresh ideas and bringing them in a very different way to articulate it, sometimes it lands a lot better. I think we are shifting at Hiscox, although it's a traditional insurance company. The way that we work is shifting, and that's good because we're able to drive things a lot quicker. But I think for me, it's really I was able to thrive in that because I could work at pace, I could make quick decisions, I could identify things a lot quicker than maybe some others could, and be able to sort of spot the gaps and start coming up with solutions. So you might not be able to make that quick decision and be agile and overnight change it, but you can still start to implement things at a much quicker pace.
Awesome. Any more questions? I have one question, if you'll allow.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. It sounds like with Hiscox, you were brought in to take the company on this journey. But if you're within an organisation that perhaps hasn't got that buy-in from the exec team, how do you get that buy-in to go on this journey? Because it's it sounds like a lot of work, and it sounds like the end results are amazing. But how do you kind of have that initial conversation to start it?
Data. I mean, it's really around, it's data. It's really around telling the story and sort of identifying what is or isn't going to be, what's not working, what's broken, where the gaps are, and being able to, and you're not just sort of holding them out, holding up the problem. It's also what can we do to fix it? How can we solution? What is the short-term and the long-term plan? How can we bring this to life to make it a much more streamlined, experience for everybody, including candidates and our hiring managers and stakeholders. So I think for me, it's really sort of the data piece, because that's the only way that you can kind of get a seat at the table and kind of just really, bring that meaningful story to life for them.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Any further questions at all from the room? Wonderful stuff. Thank you so much, Summer.
Thank you.
Take that off, yeah. Once again, thanks so much to Summer Curtis there, and thanks to everyone for joining us again on the Tech Hiring Stage brought to you by HackerJob. We have one more talk at 4:15, talking all things global hiring with Daniel Hecker-Campbell. Please come back for some fantastic insights at 4:15. But for now, go grab a drink, cool down. Yeah, we all need it.